Our next presenter is Ronald Zalesny, PhD, Supervisory Research Plant Geneticist at the USDA Forest Service, with 28 years of experience developing poplar, willow, and other fast-growing trees for environmental applications. The topic of his presentation would be ecological restoration and bioenergy feedstock production with fast-growing trees selected for phytoremediation and associated phytotechnologies.
Hello and welcome today to my presentation. I'd like to thank the organizers for allowing me to speak today. My name is Ron Zalesny and I'm with the USDA Forest Service in the United States. Today I'm going to be talking about ecological restoration and bioenergy feedstock production with fast-growing trees selected for phytoremediation and associated phytotechnologies. My co-authors are Ryan Binhall and Liz Rogers from the USDA Forest Service and Dr. Chung Ho Lin from the University of Missouri. I want to start our journey together today by showing you this illustration, essentially trying to put trees and other vegetation where really nothing wants to grow, whether that be the fact that there's no agronomic properties in the soil, or maybe there's contamination in the soil, lack of water, too much water, and all of these other characteristics that contribute to very harsh site conditions. But there is a group of nature-based solutions called phytotechnologies that are used to attempt to solve and mitigate problems on these kinds of sites. Phytotechnologies are defined as the strategic use of plants to solve environmental problems. You can see here we have this figure on the right-hand side that shows three networks: green networks, blue networks, and gray networks. And phytotechnologies occur in the intersection of all three networks. So the green networks are anything related to forests, open spaces, things with grass, anything where you can see vegetation. Blue networks are lakes, ponds, rivers, and anything associated with water. And gray networks are those such as utility corridors, highways, streets, these hardscapes. And so when we think of phytotechnologies, we want to address the intersection of all three things. And in doing so, we open up a world of opportunities for the science of phytotechnologies. You can see here many different scientific disciplines represented, from everything from environmental engineering to agronomy, biotechnology, to the environmental sciences. And so what I would like to show you are a bunch of examples of phytotechnology applications that are related to pollution mitigation, stormwater management, human well-being, and also land restoration. Pollution mitigation examples include things like landfills and riparian buffers. Now, riparian buffers are typically associated with rural areas. Landfills are located along the rural to urban continuum. Stormwater management examples include rain gardens, constructed wetlands, bioswales, and green roofs. And especially in urban areas, when we think of human well-being, we have urban trees, urban forests, and other areas where trees and green areas and open spaces contribute to human well-being. And we'll see this in a few slides later on. And lastly, I want to show you two examples of land restoration that I think are particularly pertinent to the conference that you folks are running now, and for the participants that you're listening to presentations for, and that's mine reclamation and brownfields restoration, both also occurring across the rural to urban continuum. Typically, mines are associated with rural areas and brownfields are associated with urban areas. However, that does not preclude a brownfield from being located out in rural areas. And with mine reclamation, this is the situation where you've heard me already talk about kind of lack of agronomic properties to the soil. Maybe it's very dry. And brownfields, these are situations that are typically highly contaminated with both inorganic and organic contaminants, and they're in need of remediation and restoration. And so with many of these applications, we're moving from ecosystem degradation to ecosystem restoration. And so to do so, I like to look at the RE continuum. If those of you who have had a restoration ecology class and we move from ecosystem degradation up to restoration, there are all these words in the middle that begin with RE. You can see them on the figure: recovery, rehabilitation, reclamation, remediation. And so for remediation, we need plants that are workhorses. And we'll talk about specific workhorse species that we use in our research and our applications later on. But first, I want to introduce you to another major concept of the presentation called phytoremediation. Phytoremediation is the use of trees to clean up contaminated soils and waters. So it seems like this big word, but really we're using trees to go to these harsh sites, and they could have polluted soils, they could have polluted waters, sediments, basically any kind of soil media that you can think of. And we're planting these trees, and there are various processes of phytoremediation that are being taken place in the soil and in the trees themselves that are helping to clean those contaminated areas. We typically think of 6 phytoremediation processes that are listed here in this figure. The first is phytovolatilization, the second, phytodegradation, the third, phytostabilization, then rhizofiltration, phytostimulation, which is also called rhizodegradation, and that's what I will be calling it, rhizodegradation today, and also phytoextraction. I have some slides coming up that will detail these in much greater detail than this figure, but I just wanted to give you an overall feel for the fact that when we're dealing with phytoremediation, we're dealing with processes that are taking place in the soil, in the plant roots, in the plant wood, and also in the leaves. And so it's a total systems approach. And what we're trying to achieve is the combination of ecological benefits and also human health benefits. And in order to do so, we try to identify what are the contaminants. And so contaminants are broken into 2 general categories: organic contaminants and inorganic contaminants. The organic contaminants are pollutant compounds that typically contain carbon, oxygen, nitrogen bonds. These are human-made or synthetic compounds. They typically have very long lives in the atmosphere or in the soil and water. And the second group are inorganic contaminants. These are heavy metals and salts and everything that you kind of find on the periodic table. And so you can see this table from the book Phyto by Kate Kennan and Niall Kirkwood, and they list the types of contaminants, the contaminant group, and then the typical sources of where those pollutants come from. And in addition, this figure shows the phytotechnology mechanisms that I mentioned in the slide with the processes, in addition to kind of a description of what those mechanisms are and what kinds of contaminants are associated with those mechanisms. And so you can see most of them are related to both inorganic and organic contaminants, but I will point out phytodegradation and rhizodegradation are associated with organic contaminants. And so now let's take a look at the different processes. First, phytoextraction. This is the uptake of contaminants from the soil by the plant roots, followed by translocation into the harvestable plant biomass. So you can see here the pollutants are these little red circles. They're in the soil, they're taken up into the roots, and then translocated to the wood and into the leaves. Next, we have phytodegradation, which is the degradation of complex organic molecules into simple molecules, or the incorporation of these molecules into plant tissues. So when phytodegradation takes place, it could be that the basic physiological processes that are taking place in the tree are actually utilizing some of those molecules that are broken down from those organic contaminants. And you can see here the breakdown of those contaminants in the wood and the leaves. Similarly, we have the breakdown of contaminants within the plant root zone, what we call the rhizosphere. So with rhizodegradation, or as I stated before, phytostimulation, bacteria or other microorganisms who are living near the plant roots in that rhizosphere are actually breaking down the contaminants, and the tree is very passive in this situation. The tree itself is not actually breaking down the contaminants. It's just providing the environment that the microorganisms or the bacteria need to live and to thrive, and they are actually carrying out the rhizodegradation. Next, we have phytovolatilization, which is the process where pollutants are absorbed and then volatilized to the atmosphere, typically in inert form. So you can see here the pollutants are in the soil, taken up by the tree roots, translocated to the above ground portion of this tree, it broken down, and then volatilized. Next, we have phytostabilization, which is the reduction of the mobility and bioavailability of the pollutants in the environment. So in this figure, you can see the pollutants kind of locked into the soil and into the rhizosphere here, and not being translocated or taken up into the above ground portions of this tree. In addition to the processes that I just talked about, when all of them are going on, and you can kind of see the pollutants here, the water, the arrows, all this going on, what we need to remind ourselves is, in addition to the ecological benefits, we also have the human health benefits that are associated with phytoremediation. There are major physical health benefits of phytoremediation. For example, in brownfields, where health impacts from organic and inorganic contaminants include liver toxicity, endocrine disorder, respiratory diseases, and increased cancer risk, phytoremediation can help to mitigate or reduce these health impacts. In addition, if we have situations in urban and rural areas with stormwater contamination from organic contaminants, in addition to biological contaminants like bacteria from pet wastes and failing septic systems, we also can reduce health impacts such as decreased semen quality in men, higher miscarriages in women, premature menopause, and also increased risk of birth defects in children. Lastly, air pollution can be mitigated and or reduced by the use of phytoremediation. So certain pollutants include volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, and odor, and phytoremediation can help reduce the risk of cancer, endocrine disorder, respiratory and vascular illnesses, as well as having positive effects on mood and psychological functioning. In addition, there are many mental health benefits of phytoremediation. For example, increasing positive moods and reducing stress while in green spaces and parks and other areas that are aesthetically pleasing, in addition to reducing stress and lower blood pressure, and moving away from the physiological aspects but improved psychological well-being that are associated with these urban trees, green trees, parks, and phytoremediation. In addition, the smell of urban forests has provided elderly folks and people with health problems increased memory recall and also multisensory stimulation. In the last slide, I'll talk about in terms of the benefits of phytoremediation has a temporal scale. So you can see in the short term, we have enhanced aesthetics, Moving into the medium term, improved mood, lowered stress, improved psychological well-being that I just talked about on the last slide. And then as we move to longer term, which is usually what people associate with phytoremediation, we get into the ecological benefits. So these include improved soil health, noise reduction, improved air quality, erosion control. So this is a huge one with respect to runoff reduction, in addition to wind speed reduction. And then what we're really talking about a lot here today, carbon sequestration, but also pollution remediation. So in addition to using the trees for the environmental applications and greening and cleaning in phytoremediation and the associated phytotechnologies that I talked about before, we also can use those trees as feedstocks for bioenergy production. And so if we think about this, I like to say we're trying to grow trees as fast as possible to provide targeted ecosystem services in specialized applications. So we just talked about a lot of those applications, but we can also extend that to biomass production and carbon sequestration. And depending on where you are in the world, people call this different things, but it's all the same in terms of the silvicultural prescriptions. So, for example, in Germany and the US, they might call it fast-growing plantations. In Germany, the UK, and the US, short rotation coppice. And you can see this list of these other terminologies for what we call these trees that are fast-growing that provide these ecosystem services. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to be referring to them as short rotation woody crops. And so there are 4 genera that we deal with: Populus, which are the poplars; Salix, which are the willows; Eucalyptus, which are the eucalypts; and Pinus, which are the pines. And the 2 that we use the majority of the time are poplars and willows, and that's just because we're in a temperate zone. They grow faster than any other trees we have here, and they exhibit favorable traits for the phytoremediation that we've been talking about today. There are numerous advantages of short rotation woody crops. They're well studied. Their base populations exhibit a tremendous amount of diversity, so we're able to select clones and varieties for various applications and end uses, in addition to matching those specific genotypes to contaminants, and then taking it one step further, where those genotypes put those contaminants, whether they lock them up or degrade them in the roots, move them and translocate them up into the wood and leaves. This is very important from the standpoint of phytoremediation, and also from the standpoint of bioenergy feedstock production when we're looking at maximizing genotype by environment interactions to enhance the biomass production. If anyone is interested, we, a while back in 2011, put out a book chapter on woody biomass from short rotation energy crops. We talk about the 4 genera that I was just mentioning: the poplars, the willows, the eucalypts, and the pines. This photo shows the differences in the silvicultural prescriptions of poplars and willows. You can see on the top, poplars planted in as single stems, typically 3 meter by 3 meter spacing. The willows much tighter and much denser. From a phytoremediation perspective, we like to integrate both of these into our phyto buffers so that we can optimize pollutant removal and also things like runoff reduction and other ecosystem services. This is an example of an agroforestry system with poplars in the background, and you can see the agronomic crops in the foreground. And one of our phytoremediation buffer systems, and I like this drone photo because it shows the phyto buffer system that is integrated into the agricultural landscape. So you can see here is our phyto buffer. And the reason why we placed it here is because there is a landfill. This is a landfill cap, landfill over here. The water drains into a creek here that outside of this picture then drains into a river and ultimately goes into Lake Michigan. But for this particular location, in addition to runoff from the landfill and potential below ground seepage, we also have runoff from this agricultural field over here. And so it kind of cuts through this woodlot. And so we're trying to cut off that runoff before it interacts with what's coming from the landfill and then going into this little creek and this waterway down here. So when I talk about poplars and willows and eucalypts and pines, they have specialized traits. And there are 3 of them that are the most important. And I'm mentioning this because for folks around the world, if you don't have poplars and willows that are local, or you don't have access to a clone bank of poplars and willows, you can explore other genera and other species. But from a phytoremediation perspective, there are 3 traits that are necessary. The first is elevated hydraulic control potential. What this means is we can select from that tremendous amount of diversity that I talked about before and find genotypes that can have elevated biomass production when given a lot of water. So let's say we have a wastewater application situation where we're feeding the trees landfill leachate, and we're irrigating and fertilizing them with the landfill leachate, and they'll drink and drink and drink and drink and luxury consume that leachate and produce high levels of biomass. In addition, they could other genotypes could actually be drought tolerant, and we can select from those that can produce high levels of biomass without needing a lot of water. And so that's the elevated hydraulic control potential. And then the other 2 traits are much more straightforward: fast growth, which leads to high biomass productivity, and also extensive root systems. Recognizing the ability to select within this diversity numerous superior and favorable tree varieties for phytoremediation and associated phytotechnologies, 20 years ago, we began developing a method called phytorecurrent selection to be able to match those varieties to the contaminants and where the variety puts the contaminants, as I talked about before. And what's really cool for us is about 3 months ago, the United Nations endorsed phytorecurrent selection as a good practice within their United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So if anyone is interested in learning more, you can scan that QR code there or contact me for more details. You can also follow the link that I have here. But what we would like to point out today is that phytorecurrent selection is really about communities. And so we take traditional knowledge, practical knowledge, scientific knowledge, integrate those to come up with our phytotechnology best practices that are related to phytorecurrent selection, and translate that into community priorities, management priorities, and research priorities. As a result of all of these efforts, we now have a portfolio of phytoremediation and phytotechnology applications that we're working on, have worked on, and are planning on working on. So I've already talked about phytorecurrent selection. And a major portion of our work is phytoremediation of inorganic and organic contaminants, in addition to salt tolerance and salinity thresholds, biochar, using biochar as a sustainable soil amendment, in addition to mine reclamation and restoring lands degraded from mining, in addition to green infrastructure, stormwater management, and brownfields, especially in urban areas, and wastewater applications. So I talked about using landfill leachate as irrigation and fertilization for trees. We also use wastewater such as contaminated groundwater for those types of applications. And then lastly, prioritizing landfill contaminants for environmental remediation. Liz Rogers, our co-author, actually has developed a green prioritization tool in order to both identify and prioritize contamination from landfill leachate and soils based on impacts to human health. And so I think this could be very powerful for some of the folks that are participating in this conference. If you want more information, please reach out to me and I can connect you with Liz. But this is the way that I like to think about it. Typically in the United States, contamination is regulated by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or the U.S. EPA. They have particular lists of these contaminants, oftentimes with thresholds, and they will say, okay, if it is this VOC, then it should not exceed this level. If it does, then there needs to be some form of remediation or reclamation of it. Well, most of these lists were developed decades ago and are kind of outdated, and certainly do not include all of the potential contaminants that can be at these phytotechnology sites. What Liz has done is develop a method to find the needle in the haystack, so to speak. So instead of starting out with a list and saying we are going to analyze for these contaminants, she is analyzing the media. So in this particular situation, let's say it's landfill leachate, and finding out what contaminants are in it. It could be 2,000 contaminants. Then going through various databases based on human health and ecotoxicology, and being able to then come up with a list, let's say 20 contaminants that are the highest threat to human health. And so this is very powerful for us. I think we're going to be moving this along into the future and enhancing her methodology. And so, yeah, so like I said, if anyone is interested, please let me know. Lastly, and something that I'm going to talk about today, is the incorporation of clean water, healthy soils, and carbon with the production of agroforestry phytoremediation buffer systems. And I chose to talk about this today because I think it really relates to the topic of the conference and areas you might have that are in need of these phytoremediation buffer systems. So just to give you a little bit of background, the Laurentian Great Lakes of North America consists of 5 major lakes: Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. And we have established agroforestry phytoremediation buffer systems within the watersheds of Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. And this is important because the Great Lakes provide many benefits to people and the environment. So for us, the Great Lakes are the largest surface freshwater ecosystem in the world. 21% of the world's freshwater supply, 84% of North America's surface freshwater comes from the Great Lakes. In addition, over 34 million people, which is 10% of the United States population and 32% of the Canadian population, benefit by having substantial ecosystem services from the Great Lakes. And the gross regional product is estimated at 4.1 trillion US dollars that is associated with the Great Lakes. So for us here, this water resource that we have is hugely important. And as a result, we formed Great Lakes Phyto, which is an international consortium dedicated to enhancing the ecosystem services of the Great Lakes. And if you're interested, I've got a link to our YouTube video there. And once again, please let me know if you have any questions or are interested in learning more about the consortium. Since 2016, Great Lakes Phyto, the partners within Great Lakes Phyto received funding from what's called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and we established these agroforestry phytoremediation buffer systems in the basin that I just showed you. You can see it in the figure on the left here. There are 16 of these, what we shorten it up to just say phyto buffers, and they're indicated by these green hexagons. And these 16 constitute the largest field-based phytoremediation testing network in the world. These are all replicated with the poplar and willow clones that came out of our phytorecurrent selection that I was talking about before. So we're constantly collecting growth and physiology and ecosystem services data on these trees. And you can see a picture on the right there. This is a drone photo of one of them. So the poplars are on the left, the willows are on the right. And I'm going to take you through some of these to explain the ecosystem services and ecological and human health benefits, because I think they do relate to the theme of the conference. And in particular, the situation that we're dealing with, degraded lands and waters, requires a solution. And one potential solution that Great Lakes Phyto has developed are these agroforestry phyto buffers. And we like to look at outcomes related to three pillars of sustainability: the quality of life that they can help to provide for the communities, stewardship, and also profit. So for quality of life, we're looking at things like reduced health risks from pollution, public engagement, best management practices. Stewardship entails clean water, healthy soils, and carbon sequestration. And profit. So this is where the bioenergy feedstock production comes in. So we can have feedstocks for bioenergy, biofuels, bioproducts, in addition to enhancing the productivity of the land. This is an example of one of the landfills that we work at and that we have installed one of our phyto buffers at. And you can see massive landfill here, very close to a waterway that ultimately drains into Lake Michigan. And what I want to point out here is that this is actually an urban landfill. If we went and stood on top of here and looked in this direction to the left in the picture, then we would see the skyline of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So this, not just this cap, but the overall landfill services about 750,000 people. And so we are trying to reduce both ecological impacts and human health impacts that are associated with above ground runoff and also potential below ground seepage. This is one of the first examples that I want to show you of one of our phyto buffers. This is located in Whitelaw, Wisconsin, which here in the lower left of the photo, you can see I have a yellow star. Chicago is right about where the red pointer is right now. Minneapolis is a little bit off of the picture, but off to the left here. And so at this particular site, what we have going on is we have a landfill off, closed landfill off here on the right-hand side, and there is contaminated groundwater that's flowing underground directly under the trees and hits a groundwater intercept trench on this road that is then diverted over to this building. It's collected and then shipped off to municipal wastewater treatment plant. And so we permitted through our regulators and are able to now capture that water and irrigate it back onto the trees. Now the contaminant of interest is something that when it hits the air is volatilized, and so when it actually gets back on the trees and on the ground, it is not a problem anymore. And also the trees benefit from obviously getting that irrigation and any other nutrients that might be in that groundwater. I'll show you another view of this here, so you can see there's the closed landfill that I was talking about. Actually quite massive. You can't really get a good feel for the scale of it in this picture, but I just wanted to show you that, there's runoff here, but then also that groundwater that's flowing directly under the trees. So this infographic shows that. So we have the landfill, we have the poplar trees, the willow trees, and then this runoff and groundwater going under the trees, that groundwater intercept trench flowing over to the left of this photo here, and being collected and shipped off site. And so this is a situation where we definitely have runoff reduction going on, and groundwater recycling, but also phytoremediation, because we're trying to clean and filter the runoff and the groundwater. And so these trees are definitely acting as green filters as these processes are taking place with the water movement. And so that's one example. A second example is here in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. You can see this is just south of the site where we just were. So once again, Chicago is down here in the, if you look at my pointer in the lower left of the drone photo. At this site, there was unregulated dumping up here on the top of this cap in the 50s and 60s that then leached down and caused contaminated groundwater that then flows in this direction to Lake Michigan. And so if you look at the arrows, there actually is the contaminated groundwater plume that flows directly under our poplar trees. So we have our poplar trees here. We have willows around the edge of this treatment pond. We couldn't get any here because there was so much gravel that we literally could not plant into it right here. And the situation is that the engineers actually made this treatment pond, and you can see the mixer there to aerobically treat the contaminated groundwater, which is about 1 meter down. It's flowing under our trees, so our trees are performing phytoremediation and then trying to block it from moving further into a river, into a stream that then goes into a bigger water body and then ultimately into Lake Michigan. And so this is another application. We're not irrigating the trees, but we're taking care of the contaminated groundwater in the soil and below ground. And I'll just point out here, I don't know how well you can see it, but there are differences in crown architecture of our poplar clones. So I talked about selecting clones that are based on the contaminants and where they put the contaminants and those kinds of things. And you can kind of see taller trees with this lighter, almost kind of gray crown, and then these greener trees. So the purpose of that is to extend our phytorecurrent selection testing in the field and to validate it in the field. And once again, I wanted to provide you with an infographic to show you. So you have this historic dumping site, and then this treatment pond, the contaminated groundwater flowing under the poplars, the willows on the on the perimeter of the pond. So this is an integrated system with both genera treating the contaminated groundwater and filtering it. The last example that I want to show is from Menominee Falls, Wisconsin. This is actually the same landfill that you saw before that services 750,000 people for the city of Milwaukee. You can see here closed landfill on the left-hand side of the photo. There's runoff going into this waterway that then flows to the upper left of the picture. Lake Michigan is about a kilometer if I kept going in that direction to the upper left. And so we can see here some poplars, some willows, some poplars in the background, and you won't be able to see it here, but I have other photos coming up. Stormwater treatment pond combined with a constructed wetland back here. So we have this integrated system serving as this phytobuffer for this waterway, accepting the runoff coming off of the landfill in addition to any below ground seepage. So we have stormwater management, runoff reduction, and phytoremediation occurring at this site. This is a close-up view of the poplars and the willows and the other poplars with that constructed wetland that I was talking about within the yellow square here. And I wanted to give you a different perspective. So this is the same system, but just from a different angle in the drone. And you can see then here here's the constructed wetland, the stormwater treatment pond, the first set of poplars, the willows, and the second set of poplars. And what I want to point out is that early on when we were establishing the trees, these poplar trees and the willow trees, we actually irrigated with water coming out of this stormwater treatment pond. And what's important with this, in this kind of application, is that you can notice this parking lot. And the parking lot is very large, and it actually is where this particular company parked its garbage trucks. So there was a lot of leakage of, leachate that came out of the back that had refuse in it, in addition to potential diesel fuel and oil and those kinds of things. And it all drained to this corner right in here. There was an oil water separator there that was to treat that storm water before it was then released down here in the lower right of the photo into a small water body, a little creek that then flowed into a river and then Lake Michigan. And so instead of doing that, we diverted the water into this stormwater treatment pond. The water then went through numerous cells in this constructed wetland and then was released. And so we use this as a nature-based solution to treat the stormwater, to irrigate the poplars and willows, in addition to performing the phytoremediation and runoff reduction that I was talking about before. This photo shows another angle of that system. So the poplars are here, the stormwater treatment pond here, and the constructed wetland right here. As with the other sites, I wanted to show you an infographic that shows runoff going into that treatment pond, the constructed wetland, the poplars, the willows, the poplars, and that larger stormwater retention pond. And so this, for us, is a very integrated system. Like I mentioned before, it has a lot of these different components. And I think what's very valuable with it is the ability to address the needs to mitigate and reduce impacts from inorganic and organic contaminants, both coming from the landfill, but also that stormwater, in addition to reducing some of the human health impacts associated with those contaminants going into the water and then flowing into Lake Michigan. And so with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation by talking about opportunities for phytoremediation and associated phytotechnologies in the context of the theme of your conference, Sustainable Restoration of Agricultural Landscapes After Military Activities. I hope that by showing you the different applications and the benefits of these agroforestry phytoremediation buffer systems, that you could see the potential relevance to this kind of system going out into the agricultural landscapes that you might have to reduce both organic and or inorganic contamination, in addition to mitigate potential human health and ecological impacts. And so if anyone is interested, please reach out to me. I can help with designing any systems or just giving you basic information, those types of things. And so we're always looking for collaborations and also just providing insight and advancing these technologies worldwide. So I hope you gained a lot of insight from my presentation, and I thank you for allowing me to talk today. And we also have a two-page Rooted in Research bulletin that essentially summarizes what I've talked today. It's titled Pollution Solutions, Maximizing the Cleaning Power of Trees. And so that would be a good place if you just need a short summary, or you want to talk to colleagues or your supervisor, your administrators, those kinds of things. This would be a good starting point. In addition, in the last few years, I, along with numerous colleagues, have put out 2 special issue books in the journal Forests that have focused on the use of short rotation woody crop production systems for ecosystem services and phytotechnologies across the rural to urban continuum. These are available as PDFs for free online. If you go to the Forests website, the publisher you can see in the bottom right, MDPI. So again, I'd like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me and allowing me to speak today. And I hope that what I have presented might spark some interest for you. I have some links there on the bottom of the slide if you're interested in that prioritization tool that I talked about that Liz Rogers has developed, in addition to the phyto buffers. And the top link will take you to that Rooted in Research article that I showed you. And in addition, feel free to reach out to me at the email address that's on the slide if you have any questions about phytoremediation and associated phytotechnologies. and also bioenergy feedstock production and how they may be integrated to meet your needs. Thank you very much and take care.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for your wonderful presentation. So we are already a little bit over time, but of course we cannot leave you without any questions. We have two questions, so I read you both, and you can decide which one to answer or answer briefly both. Do you believe that fast-growing trees can be associated with ecological restoration? And another one is, do you think it is possible to implement such system on a broad level in Ukraine? I think that the second question is related to like treatment of war damaged areas.
So, hi everyone. Sorry that I wasn't able to give my presentation live. I messed up the time, and I thought it was Chicago time, and then I logged in, and it was like, it's actually New York time. So for the first question, can fast-growing trees be used for restoration? I think they are not the end goal of the restoration. So the quick answer is yes, but they are more geared towards the remediations. So that step right before restoration. And then what we have been doing is then deploying slower growing shade tolerant species that when the poplars and willows have outlived their biological usefulness, these other species are underplanted below them, and then the poplars and willows are removed after they have done the remediation, and then the final piece of the restoration is these other species. With that said, there are definitely poplar and willow species that are long-lived. For example, here in the United States, we have populus deltoides, which can live over 100 years, so that can certainly be used in the restoration, in long-term restoration objectives. So I think it's a matter of the silvicultural prescription, and they can play a key role. But I think there's one more step after the phytoremediation that I talked about today. Then the second question with regard to, can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, the second question, do you think that this system can be implemented on a broad level in Ukraine?
I think it can. If you folks have access to, a poplar and willow gene bank where you can use these genera, or like I mentioned, other species in genera that exhibit those three traits, so elevated hydraulic control potential, high biomass, extensive root systems. I think that's the first key, is having the tree species that are available, and then adapting the actual phytobuffer prescriptions to your specific site conditions, but from the standpoint of the organic and inorganic contaminants, and also the damage to soils and other ecological processes, I think that these phytobuffers that I have described show great potential based on what we have been doing here in the United States, and then also throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ron. Wonderful presentation. We definitely have more questions, but unfortunately we are short with time.